Hey YouTube, in this video we will be discussing the crucial technique that every developer should be using to handle crashes more gracefully. Before we jump into the implementation details, let's quickly understand what could be the different reasons for the app crashes. Generally, the most common reasons are unhandled exceptions, network errors, and memory leaks. And these often causes your app to crash unexpectedly on the user, which is never a good experience. So, DefaultUncaughtExceptionHandler is a simple method that allows us to define a custom exception handler that gets called whenever an uncaught exception occurs in our application. Let's take a look on how to implement this in the Android projects. So, I'm just going to create a new Android project, but you could use an existing project. This also works for View System and Jetpack Compose. I'm just going to go ahead and create a new Compose project. But if you're using the traditional View System, it should still work fine. All right, so we're just going to give this project a name. It's going to be called Exception Handler Example. All right, and I'm just going to leave it in wherever I save it, and it doesn't matter what version of Android I'm going to use. This is perfectly fine. So I'm just going to go ahead, click Finish, and wait for Android Studio to bring up the project. Let Gradle finish syncing. So Gradle sync is finally completed, and now we have our project up and running. We're going to go ahead and create a new application class, but if you already have one, you can go ahead and use that. We're going to just call this, we're just going to call this sample app, and we're going to make it extend the application class. And we're going to override the onCreate method. Right now, this does nothing. It's just an empty onCreate method. All right, so now after we've created our application class, we need to define it in the manifest file. So we're just going to go ahead and go to the application tag, click name.sampleApp. That means our application is now good to go. So now whenever the app launches, the application class is going to be called first, and the onCreate is going to execute first. So this makes it perfect for us to handle the exception or to set up the exception handler here. All right, so once we have created our application class, we're going to create a new interface, and we're going to call this interface exception listener. So let's go ahead, create this, and we're going to call this exception listener. And it's going to be a very simple interface with just one method in it. And this method is going to be called function Uncaught. So we're just going to create this simple method called UncaughtException, which is going to have thread and a throwable attached to it. Now we're not going to make these nullables. Now we come back here, and we're just going to make our application class extend this exception listener. And that means we need to override the method. So let's go ahead and implement and override this method as well. So we have our onCreate method. We have our UncaughtException method, right? Both of them works great. Awesome. So right now, I'm just going to make it a simple log statement here. I'm not going to add anything specific. And we're just going to call this sample app and an uncaught exception. And we're just going to say t.throwable.print stack trace. All right, so I'm just going to make a log statement here. So whenever this uncaught exception is triggered, or whenever an app level exception is caught, it's just going to log the exception for me. So now we're going to set up an exception handler, and I usually prefer writing my codes in different methods. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a new method called setupExceptionHandler. I misspelled it. setupExceptionHandler. And in this method, what we're going to do is we're going to implement the handler, and we're going to get looper.get main looper, and I'm going to post on top of that. I'll tell you what this code does, but just bear with me for a second while I write this down. I'm just going to do a small while loop here, and in this, I'm just going to say try. So I'm just going to do looper.loop, and whenever I get into a catch, I'm just going to do uncaught exception and thread, and I'm going to do looper.get main looper dot thread, and I'm going to pause E. I'm not going to log that statement because our uncaught exception already logs that statement for us. This piece of code right here basically checks for ANRs. We can use this to check ANRs, and this is really helpful when we don't know exactly why a specific ANR is happening. This could give you more information. Now, coming back to handling the thread, all right? So I'm going to go ahead and do thread, set default exception handler, default uncaught exception handler, and I'm just going to pause this, and I'm going to do T, E, and we're going to take a look at what these are. And I'm just going to call uncaught exception T, E. Basically, the default exception handler gives us a thread and a throwable, which we can then use to our advantage. All right. Now, all of this is done. Let's call this method inside the onCreate. You obviously want to do it after onCreate. It's complaining about making it private. Let's go ahead and do that. So most of our code is now done. Now, how do we test this out? So in order for me to test this out, I'm just going to go into the main activity, and I'm just going to create a new button. Let's move this greeting inside, and that's going to be our label. And over here, I'm just going to do throw an exception, and this will just be a text exception. So whenever you click on the button, it should basically throw a test exception. Now let me go ahead, hook up my device, get it ready so we can test this out. All right, so my test device is now connected. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull up the device right here so that you guys can see what's going on. And yeah, let's run the app. All right, so we have our app running right now. I'm just going to go ahead and delete all the logs that were already there. And clicking on this, you see it comes down to this saying that there has been an exception. It logged the error, but it did not crash. And basically, this is the statement that got logged. But in general, what I prefer doing is logging this information to Crashlytics and then redirecting the user to a different error state of the screen. And that's a wrap for today's video, guys. I hope you found this crash catching tutorial really helpful for your Android development journey. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Until next time, happy coding.